All set, Joel.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Joel Whitney from Brooklyn Public Library's BPL Presents, our Arts and Culture Programming Department, and it pleases me to welcome Dr. Keisha Blain here to discuss her lucid biography of Fannie Lou Hamer with historian Alexis Coe. History is increasingly a part of the department's brief, especially after our merger with the Brooklyn Historical Society to form a sort of 61st BPL branch renamed the Center for Brooklyn History. In the weeks to come, we will feature the memoir of a survivor of Guantanamo, a film about Anthony Bourdain, a panel in celebration of Latinx history and heritage, an Indigenous Peoples Day mini film festival, and a toast to celebrate the shortlist for the Brooklyn Public Library Literary Prize. And I welcome you tonight, and I invite you to follow other upcoming events. In addition to author talks, our music, film, visual arts, and youth and family programs can be found on social media at BPL Presents, as well as our web calendar at bklynlibrary.org, BPL Presents. Tonight we have a special talk that we're so glad to present, Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America by Keisha and Blain. If you have ever told police officers at a protest or rally the whole world is watching, or encouraged would-be allies to, quote, do the work, you are echoing the life, work, and ideas, and sometimes direct quotes, of Fannie Lou Hamer. As a woman of religion, she warned the poor believers among her groups that faith alone could not lift them out of poverty, but that only collective activism could do that. Denied a more robust education due to the stringent, rigged system of sharecropping in her native Mississippi, she only learned she had the right to vote when Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee members came to the state to register Black citizens to try to oust the corrupt white supremacist Dixiecrats. This was in 1962, already in her 40s. From that auspicious beginning, she tried everything she could to reform the Mississippi Democratic Party, all male, all white, and appeared at the Democratic National Convention in 1964 with an alternative Democratic Freedom Party consisting of white and Black members, men and women. She made a speech on television that I think millions watched, calling out these problems before the nation. In prose that is supple and lucid, each chapter beginning with a contemporary activist indebted to Hamer, Dr. Blain has written an important, much-needed book. Dr. Keisha N. Blain is an award-winning historian of the 20th century United States with broad interests and specialization in African-American history, the modern African diaspora, and women's and gender studies. She's an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh, the president of the African-American Intellectual Historical History Society, and a columnist for MSNBC. She is currently a fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard University and a member of the School of Social Science and the Institute for Advanced Study. She's got a long list of other accomplishments and publications, and we'll drop those in the chat. She can be followed on Instagram at Keisha and Blain, and we're delighted that she'll be in conversation with our friend and multiple appearances at BPL Presents, Alexis Coe. Alexis Coe is a historian. She's the New York Times bestselling author of You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington, as well as Alice and Frida Forever. A Murder in Memphis will soon be a major motion picture. Please welcome Dr. Blain and Alexis Coe.
Hello and welcome. First of all, Dr. Keisha Blain, congratulations on this book. It's incredible. Beautiful. And if you haven't heard Dr. Blain on every radio station or on TV and read reviews that are all glowing, I suggest you look it up. It's going to really, really make a difference, I think, in our understanding of the civil rights movement. Before we get started, let's hear a little bit about that. You are going to read from chapter 2 for about 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. And it's a wonderful chapter that really demonstrates what you've done here. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
agreeing to do this event. I'm so excited to be here with you. And thank you to everyone who took the time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. As Alexis pointed out, I will read from chapter 2. If you happen to have the book, please do read along. On July 10th, 2015, Sandra Bland, a 28-year-old Black woman from Illinois, was driving alone in Prairie View, Texas. She was on her way to Prairie View A&M University, where she had recently secured a new position. According to Brian Encinia, the white Texas state trooper who stopped her that afternoon, Bland failed to signal as she moved from one lane to the next. What began as a routine traffic stop quickly escalated when Encinia asked Bland to extinguish her cigarette and immediately exit her car. In only a matter of minutes, Encinia tried to force Bland from the car as he called for backup. He then drew a taser and pointed it directly at Bland. "I will light you up. Get out now." As Bland exited the car, tensions continued to escalate. Within an hour of driving down a quiet street in Prairie View, Bland was stopped, arrested, and later taken to a jail in Waller County, Texas. When she was found hanging in her cell 3 days later, the encounter, which had been recorded on the officer's dash cam, circulated widely across the nation. Thousands decried the circumstances that led to Bland's tragic death, questioning the stop, the detainment, and the officer's repeated threats. Although Bland's death was officially ruled a suicide, many rejected the pronouncement, and rightfully so. In addition to the many questions that still remain unanswered concerning Bland's short time in a Waller County jail cell, there is no denying that Encinia played a role in her death. Encinia's racial profiling, which motivated his decision to stop Bland in the first place, and his failure to de-escalate what should have been a routine traffic stop, led to an unlawful arrest and created the environment that led to Bland's untimely death. Sandra Bland's life and the circumstances of her death cast a spotlight on one of the social issues that has dominated public discourse during the 21st century: state-sanctioned violence. Bland's encounter with Encinia was recorded and as a result garnered nationwide attention. Yet thousands of Black people in the United States have had similar experiences, tense exchanges with police officers that often amount to a death sentence. In a 2019 Los Angeles Times article, a group of researchers identified police violence as one of the leading causes of death for Black American men. While their research emphasized the experiences of Black men and boys, it also revealed that state-sanctioned violence imperiled Black women and girls to a greater degree than white women. In the years before Bland's confrontation with law enforcement, countless Black women died in police custody, with many of their stories going unnoticed. For example, in December 2002, Niza Morris, a Black transgender woman, sustained a fatal head injury while being transported by 3 Philadelphia police officers. Although local activists worked to shed light on the tragic events of that evening, Morris's case, like so many cases of police violence against Black transgender people, failed to garner much national attention. In July 2015, the same month of Bland's death, several other Black women died in police custody, including Raynette Turner of Mount Vernon, New York, and 18-year-old Kendra Chapman of Homewood, Alabama. Weeks later, officers killed Maya Hall, a young Black transgender woman in Baltimore, after she made a wrong turn while driving on a parkway in Fort Meade. These are just a few of the recent cases of Black women whose lives were cut short by the police in the United States. The threat of violence Black Americans face each time they encounter a police officer today is no different from the fear of lynching Black people felt during each confrontation with a white officer during the Jim Crow era. And this violence was and is not limited to encounters with the police. Black Americans today also face violence at the hands of other agents of the state, including white medical professionals who continue to treat their Black patients differently from patients of other racial groups. Fannie Lou Hamer lived with this fear of everyday public and private acts of violence while navigating the South. During the early 1960s, she used her growing visibility and national platform to share those experiences and denounce the actions of the police, as well as the white doctors who committed acts of violence against Black women through forced sterilizations. For Hamer, one of the strategies for addressing the persistent problem of state-sanctioned violence was the use of public testimony as a mode of resistance and revelation. In this way, the act was driven by both personal and political motivations. A source of empowerment and healing, public testimony also provided a vehicle for Hamer to make her audience co-owners of trauma. Those who listened to Hamer's testimony bore witness to the pain and violence and were therefore transformed by the experience. If the violence Black women endured from the state at the hands of police officers, white physicians, and others was designated or rather designed to silence them, Hamer refused to capitulate. As Hamer recognized in her day-to-day organizing in the US South, acts of police violence and white mob violence often occurred in secret, behind closed doors and far from the gaze of others. For every public and documented act of racist violence, dozens more had taken place in secret, never to be counted or documented. In Hamer's view, those who managed to survive these brazen acts of violence needed to serve as public witnesses, speaking truthfully and openly about their personal experiences in an effort to bear witness to the pain and suffering of racial and sexual violence, bringing awareness to others and initiating radical changes. "I'm going to tell it like it is," Hamer often warned before her public speeches, as a way to boldly alert her listeners to the eye-opening accounts that would follow. The mantra, "tell it like it is a political strategy that Hamer employed in her lifetime, and one that remains a powerful feature of African-American culture today. Thank you.
You're muted, Alexis.
You missed more praise. Incredible book, and that was a great preview that shows how much you are connecting the past and the present, really drawing those lines, and that is what you've been so innovative with this book. And it made me think about her in ways that I hadn't before, because of these connections, and because, you know, when we read about the past, we try to read people within their time and their era to understand not men of their time, because everyone is of their time, but to have that and keep on reconciling it. What it did was it reintroduced her to me in this way that was really meaningful. And I kept thinking that you could teach the entirety of 20th century American history through Fannie Lou Hamer's body. She's born into a sharecropper family, which is an extension of slavery, backbreaking work that is meant to ensure that you stay in debt, that you never get ahead. She's often hungry and in pain. She can't get any help for it. She's given a hysterectomy without her consent, without her knowledge before it's happening. A white man took away her choice to be a mother, to have a child. She's sexually assaulted. She's brutally beaten. She suffers through undiagnosed illnesses. And yet, both of us learned about her quite late in life. You learned about her in college. I learned about her in grad school.
Wow.
How does this happen? How does civil rights history leave her out?
Mm-hmm. That's such an excellent question. And I have to say, too, even before I answer that question, I was very, very nervous about taking this approach to writing this book. And of course, I'll admit that in the space because, you are a historian, so you understand, I worried that in starting with these contemporary scenes, that somehow it might be interpreted that I was not being mindful of the context in which Hamer lived, right? I mean, we're always talking about the context, the time period, the place, the space, all of these things are important. But I felt that it was so valuable. It was for me, and I imagined that it would be for a reader to be able to think about Hamer in a completely different way. So I'm thrilled to hear what you said, because that's exactly what I was aiming for, even though I was nervous about taking this approach. So in terms of why it took me so long to learn about Hamer, and I suspect the same is true for you, there are several reasons. One, I think a lot has changed, certainly, since 2008. A lot has changed in the literature. I certainly want to acknowledge the remarkable scholarship, of folks like, Chena Kylie, whose biography on Hamer was the first that I had read, and it was transformative. And in fact, I'm grateful to Professor Lee for reading some of my chapters and giving me feedback in the process of writing this book. And we know, works like The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, Jean Theo Harris, certainly the work of Barbara Ransby, and just so many other scholars who have helped us understand the crucial role that Black women have played in the civil rights movement. But for the most part, I think when we look at mainstream narratives, it is still very much male dominated. That was clearly on display just a few weeks ago. And living in this particular moment where so much is happening, I'm forgetting exactly when, but you might recall that earlier, probably 6 to 8 weeks ago, unfortunately, we lost Gloria Richardson, a courageous civil rights activist who certainly shows up in many ways in this book. I draw some connections to her activism. And I saw an announcement, and I'm forgetting the publication, but I'm sure others saw it because it was quite disturbing. It was an announcement about, the passing of Gloria Richardson. And what did I see? The image of Martin Luther King Jr. being used. And I remember being surprised, as many were, saying, how in the world does a newspaper announce the passing of Gloria Richardson and lead with an image of King? And perhaps they have their reasons, but I suspect that it goes right back to what I was saying earlier about how mainstream narratives tend to be male dominated, and not even just male dominated. It tends to be sort of identifying these iconic figures. And this is not to suggest that we shouldn't be celebrating and talking about the remarkable contributions of MLK. But the point is that we've identified a couple of people, and we talk about those people all the time. We teach about those people. And in the process, we overlook, I think, an array of historical figures, including someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, who ended up playing such a crucial role in shaping the civil rights movement. And so it's both dealing with the male-dominated aspect, but also the framing of how we sort of handpick certain leaders. And so it's Rosa Parks. Every time I teach civil rights history and I say to my students, who are the Black women who are key leaders in the movement? Without question, the first answer is Rosa Parks. Sometimes someone will say Coretta Scott King, but for the most part, students probably won't make it past those two names. And this is true, I think, even as recent as just a few years ago, right? Teaching these courses. And what that has revealed to me is that I think we have not done a good job. And when I say we, I would say collectively, it's not just a critique of historians, educators. I think all of us could do a better job at making sure that the story we tell about the civil rights movement is one that includes, I think, all of these figures. And Fannie Lou Hamer is certainly one of them. And I think it's good to focus on her because it shifts the lens away from always members of the Black middle class and elite. Again, not to suggest that we don't talk about these figures, but people have to know that, impoverished people played a key role as leaders in this movement too. Disabled people played a key role in the movement too, right? And it was a movement that was made possible because of the collective effort of people from a wide array of backgrounds. And I think when we push that narrative, which reflects the true history, it's going to make a difference in all of our lives because we begin to see the possibilities for how we too can shape American society and leave our own mark.
What was so interesting about Gloria Richardson's passing and that photo and the photo you have here and photos of Dorothy Height and all sorts of other people, they look iconic. They look incredible. I mean, they are like screaming from the black and white photographs. And I think this is another thing that I thought was so incredible about it is you're making sure no one loses that thread. You are directly drawing, and we've talked around it already a little bit, but as historians, you're not supposed to do anything different.
Exactly.
You're not supposed to play with form. And what Keisha and I have in common is that we prioritize accuracy and public engagement. And we are not afraid to make that as clear as possible in a much shorter amount of time and in a more engaging way. When I say not afraid, I mean pretty afraid, but not so afraid.
Pushing through the fear.
Yes, try to push that off until the night before publication. And I think that is what's so incredible about the book. And I wonder if this is something that evolved or if you saw this as the structure of the book from the very beginning.
I saw this as a structure that I needed to really pursue from the very beginning. And I'll tell you why. There was a moment, a lot of people have said to me, well, I didn't even know you were working on a book on Fannie Lou Hamer. Well, first and foremost, I think it should be clear by now that I suspect that most, I would hope all, but I think most writers are constantly working on a ton of projects at once, right? I mean, it's hard to just focus on one thing, even if you're prioritizing one project. And I was writing another book and had interest, I had a plan to write this book on Hamer, but initially thought, okay, I'll sort of come around to it. Let me write this other book first on Afro-Asian solidarity, because this is, what's consuming my mind. Let me do that and I'll come back around. And then life happens. Not only did I encounter a number of roadblocks with the Afro-Asia project, just given the global pandemic and the reality that, of course, I wasn't, as much as I would love to, not going to be able to travel to Japan and spend time there, in light of everything that's happening, and all these archives are closed temporarily. So the reality of that is happening. But also I felt a sense of urgency. I mean, part of what became clear to me is certainly when we think about the uprisings, and I'm talking about the spring and the summer uprisings, both nationally and globally, I saw several threads emerge, as I was just writing and also just thinking about Hamer's life, Hamer's ideas. And it became very clear to me that oftentimes, I would give talks and people would say to me, how do we fix things? How do we dismantle racism and white supremacy? Literally having workshop upon workshop where people ask me these questions. And I think some people are looking for some new answer. They're looking for me to give them some insight that they had never heard before. What's the strategy? What's the new thing that will finally, be the key to dismantling systems of oppression? But one of the things that I often say is that really there's nothing new under the sun. And we sort of say that, but I don't know how much we really grapple with that. What I mean is that, so here we are just in the last 2 years talking about voter suppression, and I should say even longer than the last 2 years, at least since the Shelby decision, 2013, at least we've been talking about the attacks on the Voting Rights Act, the problem of voter suppression. And that has grown and grown and grown. And people are trying to figure out, how do we deal with it? Well, Hamer dealt with voter suppression in the context of the 1960s, and she had to devise strategies and a response to that. Well, we're talking about state-sanctioned violence with the uprisings in the last year or so. How do we deal with it? How do we respond? How do we fix this? Is a question people are asking. Well, Hamer dealt with state-sanctioned violence. She also had to deal with medical racism, and the list goes on. And what you realize is that many of the problems that we're grappling with in this current moment were the ones that Hamer also dealt with, that other activists, of the 60s and 70s were grappling with. And part of the reason why we're still grappling with these issues is because we've imagined that the civil rights movement is over, right? So this is the kind of narrative where I walk into the classroom and we talk about the civil rights movement in past tense, which is fine. I'm a historian. I understand that movements sort of have to have a beginning date and an end date. So I get it. But what I try to push my students to think about is what remains unfinished, or rather, what are the gains that we might have? What are the accomplishments? What are the gains of the 60s and 70s that might now be under threat again, that we need to now fight to protect again? So what you realize are all these continuities, as we look to the past, into the present. And so in writing the book, part of what I wanted to do was to get the reader to see that in the struggle for liberation, in the collective effort to dismantle systems of oppression, the answer can be found often in the work, in the ideas of those who have gone before us. And so it was a way to say, yes, we can try to devise new strategies. There's nothing wrong with trying to come up with something new. But what if we took a look at the steps that were effective in that particular moment, and perhaps we learn a lesson, and therefore we can strategize more effectively in the present. And so I needed to then connect past and present in a very clear way in order to accomplish that goal.
It's so interesting to me. I'm writing a book on the 20th century now, but I'm coming from the founding era, and the fundamental concerns are the same.
Right.
Voting was a huge issue for the founders. I mean, I would also love to see a class that's the revolution and the civil rights movement as an extension of the revolution, and exactly what the founders actually wanted. If we're talking about what they want all the time, they wanted this to continue, because a country that is nostalgic and rests upon tradition is decaying, and that is exactly their chief complaint, one of many, but a central complaint. We've talked about her body, we've talked about the body of the book. I want to talk about her mind, because if people know about her, they have seen footage of her speaking, and it is incredible. And then if you do a deeper dive, and everyone reads this book as they should, then that this was how she was. This is how she spoke, and she was magnetic, and she was charismatic. There was no, in presidential history, there's this idea of destiny, like you're always going through this destiny, and it denies people all this incredible work along the way. And because there's no assumption that she's destined to do what she did, you can really look at it. But she dropped out of school at 12 because she had to help support her family. She doesn't learn that she can vote until she's in her 40s. This is an observant woman. So I think that shows the level of voter suppression, like how endemic it was to everything about life there during that time in the South. It's insidious. And so yet, you have that. You have, one can be self-taught, but one needs to practice. One needs to develop certain things, unless you're Fannie Lou Hamer. And she had such an economy of language. She was so precise, so passionate, but there was more than passion there was this intensity behind it.
Mhm.
So walk us through like her mind, like her interior life and her
Mhm.
intellectual life. What was going on that behind? How did she get there, or was she always there?
Yeah. Well, there are several factors. First, I have to credit her faith. Um, I start off the book talking about certainly her early life, her family, but that scene, in August 1962, where Hamer attends this mass meeting that's organized by activists in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. And as I talk about in the book, it was the fitting space or place for Hamer to join the civil rights movement because it represented a sort of merging of both the sacred and the secular, or even more so, the sort of religious and the political, a fusion of the two, whereby Hamer, in that moment, learned about her constitutional rights to vote as a citizen of the United States, decided that she would join the movement, that she would immediately become a member of SNCC, and she would help the cause, right, to expand Black political rights. But at the same time, that was a moment of an epiphany, a sort of religious awakening, where she saw that it was a calling for her. She believed that it was ultimately divinely ordained, that not only she would be in that particular meeting, but she would come to this place in her life where she would decide to thrust herself fully into the movement. And so she would often use these analogies. One of the, she would talk, for example, often quoting scripture, the book of Luke, drawing parallels to Jesus in the context of Jesus coming to set the captives free and using similar language to describe what it was she was doing. She saw herself as a beacon of light, meant to shine into a world of darkness, to shed light on the sins of racism and white supremacy, right? This is the way that she conceptualized the world and her place within it. And so I think her fate made all the difference. And I think that's also the reason, as she moved from place to place, as she encountered an array of challenges, the kinds of experiences that, quite frankly, that might have pulled others from the movement, that might have forced someone else to just give up and say, forget it, I'm not going to keep doing this if my life is going to be threatened this way, or if I'm going to constantly have to struggle to make ends meet because of my commitment to voting rights. For Hamer, it was that she didn't just answer to men, right? She didn't answer to people. She answered to God. I mean, that's just the gravity of it. The situation for her, it was truly a divine calling, and she needed to treat it as such. And I think it brought a sense clearly of seriousness to all of what she did, and also I think a sense of trust and reliance that that God would order her steps, that He would protect her, that He would keep her, and make it possible for her to do the work that He called her to do. So that's one aspect that I think we have to talk about when we try to get into Hamer's mind and figure out why in Mississippi, a very difficult place. I mean, as I mentioned in the book, in the early 1960s, only 5% of Black residents in Mississippi were registered to vote. 5%. We're talking about a population of, an estimated 450,000 people. And we know about the violence of Mississippi. I think so many people know about the Emmett Till case, which is perhaps the most well known. But just a place where to simply assert one's authority, to articulate one's opinion could lead to the loss of one's life. And for Fannie Lou Hamer to, in that setting, stand up boldly, declare that she was committed to Black voting rights, and keep going and keep going and keep going. For a total of 15 years, she was involved in the movement. I mean, that to me can only be explained right through a great sense of faith and a realization that she was called to do this.
And And I see also the connection to language, because you know,
Mhm.
anyone who's been in a church knows they're going to get a
Right.
passionate speech. And I want to talk, this is interesting. It's God's plan. And so, you know, she can try to understand her experiences through that. And I want to get to those harrowing experiences, but I'm jumping ahead in my questions because later on I was going to ask you about religion.
Mhm.
I have never understood it quite as much, the role that it played in her life, as I did in
Yeah.
the book. And if we also, as historians, really don't talk about anything personal, but you start out your acknowledgments by thanking God.
Yeah.
And you seem particularly well suited to understand and to talk about that part of her life. And so that was really meaningful too. And I think
Mhm.
that what makes the book really different. And you've already answered the question, which is, you know, how much was it driving her? Let's talk about what we've been, you know, talking around, because I didn't want to lead with the violence, because
Right.
that
Right.
often defines her story, and I wanted to set it up in other ways first. Let's talk about her story. Can you summarize it for us?
Yes. So I think the first painful experience that that Hamer certainly spoke about publicly, not immediately, but with time, was the 1961 forced sterilization. And I think writing about that experience for me was so difficult. And there are various dynamics here because it's, the act itself is egregious. So just to give context for those who might not have yet read the book, Hamer was hospitalized in 1961. So this is a year before she joined the civil rights movement. And she had a small uterine tumor. It was a non-cancerous tumor. And, the white doctor who performed the surgery decided, unbeknownst to Hamer, to remove her uterus. To add insult to injury, he didn't say anything. He didn't tell her what had happened. So Hamer only found out about the violent act, uh, believe it or not, through the gossip, through the whisper network, because the doctor was related to someone who worked on the plantation, where Hamer worked as a sharecropper, and she heard other people talking about it. So just imagine the horror of going through that experience and not even knowing what you've endured and having to find out through someone else. And so it was devastating. Hamer confronted the doctor, demanded an answer, and he didn't provide a response. And as Hamer explained, he didn't really have to, because this was a Jim Crow South. And more to the point, this was a common practice. I mean, it's as surprising as it may sound to many people. This was a common practice, not only in the state of Mississippi, certainly throughout the U.S. South, but as I explained in the book, this happened across the nation, where particularly, Black and brown women, impoverished women would go in for all kinds of procedures, generally, small things, not even imagining what could take place, and then experiencing a forced sterilization at the hands of individuals who determined, who certainly thought they were empowered to determine who was fit to have children and not fit to have children. And so this was a painful experience that Hamer endured, and she didn't talk about it publicly immediately, but she did come to the place where she felt comfortable to shed light on it. And as I talk about in the book, as she traveled across the nation, she would talk about what she had endured and point out the fact that this was a common practice as her way of trying to change the system, certainly raise awareness. And so that becomes one example. The second, I think, transformative moment, which is also an act of violence in her life, is the 1963 Winona beating. One experience in 61, that's just traumatic. And then another traumatic experience, she's traveling with a group of activists. They had just come from a voter registration workshop, and they're heading back home. They stop, and they're at a rest stop. Um, Several activists are arrested. Hamer gets off the bus and she's trying to initially figure out what is going on because she sees that, several of her friends are being arrested. An officer grabs her. He begins to beat her. I mean, he's kicking Hamer in this. I mean, it's just a terrible scene that one can imagine. He brings her, to jail, and she's there with several others in the movement. And Hamer endures a brutal beating not only from the white guards, but they also, they ultimately ask prisoners to join into the beating, right? And so it just becomes this harrowing experience again. And then, as Hamer later reveals, in addition to the physical, the violent assaults that she's experiencing, there's also a sexual assault that takes place, right? And so it just becomes yet again another moment in her life where I think many people would have understood if Hamer decided in '63 to sort of step back from public life, to step back from the movement. No one would have questioned. I think people would have certainly understood. And that particular beating, left her with kidney damage. Hamer had a limp from childhood, and it worsened the limp. It left a blood clot in her eye. I mean, all of these physical ailments, in addition to the psychological and emotional trauma. And in a similar way, Hamer decides to take that experience. Of course, it took time, to physically heal, but to take that experience and shed light on it. So much so that she talks about it on national TV in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention. And so it's yet another example of how Hamer managed to take painful experiences and transform them into political action. I mean, it's sort of, it's one thing to say that that's possible, but it's another to see how Hamer manages to do that. And in the process leaves, I think, a powerful legacy, as I talk about in the opening of this chapter, one of the significance of public testimony to shed light on the injustices that are, taking place in this country.
I've read this story, I've heard this story every single time. It's impossible. And you've told this story so many times and written it. It never stops, really. How did she deal with these incredible, the anger and hopelessness and other emotions that would be totally legitimate if she's not going to step away from it? How does she channel that into, those are traumas she's reliving all the time because they're just piling on. How does she, and it's really just at the end of her life that she seems to be experiencing anything like depression.
Yes.
How does she mentally and emotionally, we know how she's doing physically, how is she mentally and emotionally keeping this up?
As I was writing the book, I think what was very clear to me, and I'll admit I can relate in many ways, and I suspect many people listening sort of understand the rhythms of life where you go through a difficult experience, and sometimes the only way to get past it, the only way to overcome it, or at least pretend to, right? I'm not a psychologist, and I suspect a lot of what I'm talking about might be interpreted as sort of, pushing aside the problem as opposed to dealing with it. But it's simply to keep busy, right? And there's a sense where there's a moment where, as I was writing the book, I could tell that Hamer was just going and going and going and going. And it was as if she paused for a moment, it would force her to reflect. It would force her to really contend with all that she was going through. And perhaps it might have stopped her in her tracks, right? And as you point out, it's not until toward the end of her life that it becomes quite clear. I mean, it's in the archives, she's writing letters where she's telling people, like, listen, I'm really down. Like, I don't have the energy. I don't feel like going on. I mean, you can see the emotional toll at that point. But it's something that I think she just kept pushing past. So maybe it's not so much that she was dealing with it, but just pushing past it, and perhaps it piled up in an unexpected way towards the end. I think all of these experiences, all of the pain, all of the trauma came to the surface at a moment where she was physically ill and unable, right, to keep pushing, unable to just travel and go all these places and get involved in all of these initiatives. It was at the moment of being home, being confined to the home, and needing to rely on people around her to care for her, because she physically couldn't do it, that the emotional, all of the feelings sort of rose to the surface. That's certainly the sense that I got in doing the research and in writing the book. And that's, I mean, it's sad, right? I mean, it's really sad as we're talking about it, but it's reflective of the, I've used the word trauma, but it is, I think, part and parcel of, one might say, the burden of leadership, right? I mean, one of the things that I say in the book too, I mean, there's a whole chapter on leadership, and Hamer would always say, listen, the leader isn't always the person that you see. It's not always the representative that's running around, the person that might be on TV, the person who has the mic. It is the person who is truly taking upon themselves all of the concerns and recognizing the needs of the community and trying to fix things. And that in of itself is a burden to carry. And she carried it for so many years. And it certainly took a toll.
Let's go back to public testimony. These truths, these threadbare lies, as Ida B. Wells called them in 1892, they're known, but you're not supposed to talk about them.
Right.
And she talked about it in a way that no one had. She had Southern politicians more panicked than they have ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, talk about rage, it was incredible. And then there were swaths of people, huge numbers of the population who had no idea this was going on, who had no idea that this was a normal thing in the South, and have been since the first enslaved person, stepped onto American soil.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a great example of that. And again, this was presented in such a different way. It really got me thinking. Fannie Lou Hamer is born in October of 1917.
Mm-hmm.
John F. Kennedy is born in May of 1917, the subject of my next book. 5 months. 5 months apart. Could have been 50 years. Could have been 50 lifetimes away. He has no idea this is going on. He doesn't even know the Great Depression happened during his lifetime until he gets to college.
Yeah.
But they are the same age. They're the same age. And what's incredible to me is, so I couldn't stop thinking about that, obviously, because I'm spending every day with him, and I'm not accepting, as I didn't with Washington, that that Black people didn't play some role in his life.
Right.
More than a chapter in a book. And even if you're not aware of it, it means something that you're not aware of it.
Right.
I think that what I kept thinking about gender, and I kept thinking about race and class and all of these things. But you very, aptly explain her views about gender roles. And you talk about, she would always make sure she would say her husband was the head of the household. And he wasn't making sure to say that so that he felt fine and people were like, okay, you're okay as a woman, you're not like getting sort of uppity. She really meant it.
Mm-hmm.
And she accepted the gender roles and, internalized misogyny and gender norms, all of that. But when she says that men need to fix this, I do hear her saying that. I do hear her saying, well, men ultimately have all the power, and they take care of us. They just need like a lot of pushing. But to me, I'm also hearing her speaking to someone like JFK, who at that, point has quite a lot of power. When she's being beaten, he's elected to the president, his family considers themselves, quite discriminated against as Irish. So
Mm.
he's totally unaware. He doesn't know her world. He doesn't, and so I guess I see that internalized misogyny, but I also think that she knows that there's only so much they can do. And we see this across the board with Black women during that time.
Right.
Black women's clubs presented Kennedy with a painting of Lincoln, I mean, everything was just really intelligently done and purposely, because they're walking on eggshells. But I really do think she is speaking to white men as well. Would you agree with that?
I think so. And your questioning made me think a lot about the sort of, I don't want to use the word tensions, but one might say complexities of her gender politics. My first book, Set the World on Fire, is on Black nationalist women. So I'm not, I'm definitely accustomed to writing about, Black women who it seemed like they're going through this sort of ideological tug of war. On the one hand, agitating for the expansion of women's rights and supporting women's empowerment. And on the other hand, also trying to make sure that they don't harm Black men in some way. So it's just kind of, I'm going to assert my authority. I'm going to make sure that my voice is heard. I want to make sure that I'm not pushed aside, on account, of my gender. But I also don't want to ever give the impression that I want to hurt Black men in some way, because I understand that they too have gone through and are going through certainly the oppression, as well as, in fact, some would go as far as to say that their sort of masculinity in some contexts might be, that it's constantly under attack because they're unable to lead. In a white supremacist society. So there are all of these ideas that I think people are struggling with in the context of the 20th century. And, when you allude to Hamer's understanding of gender roles and in the context of her husband, and I see several people asking questions about who are the people in Hamer's life who supported her. So this is a good way to kind of link to her husband. As I talk about in the book, Pat Perry is someone who he was involved in the movement. He certainly supported Hamer. He was not as visible as Hamer was, but he stood beside her. And I think part of what she tried to do was, in calling him the head of the household and talking about the important role that men would play, as leaders, as protectors and providers, and all of this language that I think fell within the general kind of, as you said, the gender norms, that traditional, at least, expectations at the time, that she both wanted to acknowledge, his support and his contribution, and then she also did not want the fact that she was so visible, the fact that she was so well known, across the nation, of course, by the mid 1960s. She didn't want all of these things to somehow take away from Pap's positioning and placing in the household. So it was this attempt to constantly speak in a way that would reassure him, and I think not just him, but just broadly speaking, because she would make these remarks publicly in newspapers and so on. So I think she was sending a message broadly about, look, our relationship sort of fits within the mold and the expectation, of what a wife is supposed to do and a husband's supposed to do. We fit the mold, even though you see me running around and doing all this work, and he's really the one, in the household, often taking care of the children. And just to clarify, Hamer did adopt 2 girls, as I talk about in the book. So I suspect that when she's talking about men's leadership and protection and all of that, I do think that it's not solely about Black men. My sense is that the way that you've described it in the context of, thinking about the president, I certainly think that Hamer would have also envisioned the role of white men in this larger, discussion of, gender roles.
It would be hard to imagine helpers out there in that situation.
Right.
I'm going to turn over to the questions soon. So get them in. I'm going to start asking them. Some of them are similar to some of them that I have, but I want to. No, I don't think anyone's going to ask this one. I want to acknowledge something incredible that you're a part of. This is a really important moment in time for historians. Your work, this is your third book. Your work has done incredibly well consistently. It's gotten a lot of attention. You've had a best-selling anthology. You've done what they said was impossible. You're working alongside other Black women historians who are doing incredible work. Erica Dunbar, Never Caught, the Washington's, relentless pursuit of Ona Judge, their enslaved person who they were going to give away as a wedding present. Marcia Chatelain won the Pulitzer Prize for history.
Yeah, and I have her book. Right behind me. So
I blurred
always, surrounded by the brilliance of Black women.
We have, of course, Nicole Hannah-Jones, who every white conservative man in America seems to want to take down. She's rejected a tenured position at UNC for Howard. You are in an unprecedented generation of Black women scholars who are standing on the shoulders of Black women historians who, were systematically excluded from departments until the 1970s, and even then barely let in, silenced, excluded, and yet they were pushing. You're doing it. You're being successful. You're surrounded by others who are doing incredible work. How does that feel to have this cohort of women? What are your hopes for the future of Black history and Black women's history?
Well, it feels great because I think, oftentimes, and this to be true, when you are a writer, it can be a fairly lonely experience. You sort of, especially as historians, you research a topic, you spend several years, oftentimes really just by yourself, digging, and you're writing, and you're trying to put something meaningful together. And it's sometimes not until you are fully done with perhaps certain chapters or even a fully drafted manuscript that you ever pull people in to get feedback. And so it can be a lonely process in that sense. There's something I think so powerful about being part of a broader community, and particularly of Black women writers and scholars who are similarly, I think, using the pen. They're using their gifts as writers to call attention to systemic racism, and doing so both in historical context as well as in contemporary context. That, I think, helps significantly, because you never want to ever be part of this. I guess, and in fact, as I'm answering the question, I think about Hamer, and I think about what it meant to. Hamer by herself, she was fiery, and we've spoken about how fearless she was, and how powerful she was as an activist. But all of that was made possible the moment that she joined, an organization, that she became involved with other activists committed to the cause. There's strength in numbers, we know this, but there's a power that I think really unfolds when you connect with other people who are like-minded. I'm going to use a biblical reference because Hamer would have, the notion that iron sharpens iron. I think that is true. And I think, my work is possible because of the work of all of these remarkable, Black women that you, mentioned, because I'm able to learn from them. And I'm able to kind of, in some ways, see the path that they take. And I'm able to then chart out, certainly my own path, but also I think figure out ways that I can connect my work, to their work. So it feels great. It feels great to be part of a broader community, of folks who are really pushing. I'll describe it as public engagement. That's a term we like to use, but truly, it's the kind of scholarship that is meant to not only speak to academics, but is truly meant to reach a broad audience, of anyone who's interested in learning the history and deepening their knowledge. So I hope that in turn that my work inspires someone. Maybe there's someone listening, they have a book idea and they just didn't have the courage to take a step forward. Maybe this will be the moment that they decide to put some ideas on paper and begin to craft that narrative. So it's a great feeling.
Yeah, I'm sure it's incredible. And I think that it's so lovely that you ended on that encouraging note. That's absolutely true, that there are too many stories for all of us to tell. And the only way they're going to be told is if other people finish. You just start it, as Seamus Heaney said, snug as a gun, and you finish it, and we get a step closer. I'm going to turn to I'm going to start with the question that I know can, it's going to speak for itself. Was there any compensation or redress for these women who suffered the unconsensual medical assaults?
Not to my knowledge. In fact, I think, what I said earlier, just how powerful it was that Hamer spoke out publicly about what had taken place, because not surprisingly, I think many people who had this painful experience didn't want to say anything, right? To this very day, I think there's a sense of embarrassment that one, might feel, certainly shame, even though, the shame should not be theirs because, they were assaulted by someone else. But still, I think in the context of the Me Too movement, it is not foreign, I think, for those who are listening, who understand how hard it is for someone to come out and say, listen, this is what has taken place. Sometimes people don't ever say what has taken place for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years. And we know this. And for all of the reasons that I think in the context of the 1960s, that people, many women who endured forced sterilizations, kept it to themselves. And Hamer was really, I think, she stood apart because of her willingness to speak about it, because of her willingness to shed the light. She made a difference because there are so many moments, as I talk about in the book, where she would go and she would discuss this. There was one moment where she was giving testimony before, a physician and a white physician, and he was from Boston, and he was stunned. He had no knowledge, and he couldn't even process it. It was like, what are you saying? Like, this is happening regularly? Where? How is this happening? But that's the irony. You have individuals who have absolutely no idea, yet it's a common practice. And so Hamer, I think, just used her voice to bring awareness, which then led people to look into it. And of course, once people started asking questions, trying to find out what's happening, not surprisingly, the practices begin to reduce. Of course, we were even talking about, the context of forced sterilization, within the last few years. So we know that this still happens, but certainly not to the extent that it did in the context of the 60s. And I credit Hamer as one of the leading figures who made that possible by speaking out. So that was pretty much the only sense of justice, never, to my knowledge, any kind of compensation to families.
There's been no form of reparations for any of the things that we've discussed. This warms the heart of historians. A junior in high school, She is,
Oh,
or I shouldn't, yes, she is, she's working on a research project. She's focusing on African American women and their fight for their voting rights. And she's planning on, focusing on Hamer and her efforts. And she wanted to know other women who you would suggest that she looked into. And you have mentioned some,
right.
who's on the side of who shall we carve in the mountain?
So many people. In fact, as soon as I heard the question, the first book that came to mind, which I just read earlier this year by a Black woman historian, Martha Jones, published a book called Vanguard, and it's how Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all. This is a really great book, published by Basic Books. I would recommend that book, and in fact, I can drop the link in the chat for anyone who's interested. The other person who comes to mind, and of course, there's so many women who Martha Jones discusses in that book, but one book in particular that I absolutely love is on Ella Baker, who, as I explained in the book, Fannie Lou Hamer adored Ella Baker, truly loved her and saw her as a mentor. And Ella Baker is someone who's instrumental, a visionary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But Barbara Ransby, who's another Black women historian, I'm just talking about all the great Black women historians tonight, wrote a book called Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement, A Radical Democratic Vision. That's another great book that I love to assign, and I'll share that as well for those who might be interested.
I mean, yeah, all those are good. Vanguard was incredible. It is just, and the generation that I was talking about, she's just named many of them. And then some of these, and you have to read some of these books that are collective biographies, because a lot of these women don't have their own biographies yet. I still want your questions. We have a little bit of time, but I want to remind you that Until I Am Free, a link to purchase is in the chat box. You can also take it out from the library. And if, BPL has plenty of copies, but if you are coming from somewhere else and they don't, you should request it. That would be very good. There's a question about Hamer's relationship with God. Community that sustained her in difficult moments. Can you speak a little bit more about one or two central particular relationships that shaped Hamer and her activism, and what we can learn about the kind of relationships that can sustain activism and provide care and in liberation movements in the present?
I mentioned Ella Baker, and I think Hamer's relationship with Ella Baker, but also her relationship with Bob Moses, who recently passed away. I think the relationship with those two in particular, I marvel at the way that they treated Hamer, the way they listened to her. I mean, it's truly a model of how we have to try to relate to one another. And so just a quick scene, Hamer's at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. And as I talk about in the book, there's a lot of pressure on her to accept, the compromise of two symbolic seats. And she makes it clear that that's not what she wants. She makes it clear that she did not come all the way to Atlantic City for two seats. And there's a moment where Hamer feels so frustrated because so many people are coming and telling her, just accept it, don't be difficult. We need to just work with we need to think about the long game. We need to think about the upcoming presidential elections. So there are all these reasons. And so she goes to Bob Moses and she goes to Ella Baker and she says, am I doing the right thing? I believe strongly in my conviction that I should not compromise here. But am I making a mistake? Because she trusted them and she knew that they would give her the right answer. And they said, you do what's best for you and for the people that you represent. And we will stand with you. And I think that's a moment that I just I find it so beautiful because they could have just said, well, listen, maybe you should just go along with this. People are telling you, to accept it, just accept it, don't be the oddball out, but they said, no, you do what is best for you. We trust you. And Hamer spoke about that moment where it just reassured her to keep pushing, right? And that was a moment of support that they often extended to her in all kinds of context. I mean, all kinds of contexts. It was something remarkable about seeing someone really live out their calling and standing with them, supporting them, and not telling them what to do, right? I mean, something that I think is hard oftentimes. We always want to give advice, tell people what to do, but that was an example of how important it was to give Hamer, in this context, her space to lead.
This is another good question, which is, besides LBJ, did MLK also, in spite of his admiration for Hamer, also, play a role in keeping her from getting her due, including more of the spotlight? I mean, they literally denied Black women the spotlight. They weren't allowed to talk when there was a spotlight.
Yeah. Right. And this, of course, rose to the surface. I was thinking about this earlier, the 1963 March on Washington, where it, once again, earlier I was talking about these male dominated narratives. I mean, that, just that was on display. The male, the masculinist, sort of framing of the movement, that was clearly on display. Several women in the movement had been pointing out, the problems of women being marginalized, and insisted on, the fact that that women should be on the program, should speak. And in the end, what they ended up, getting, what was really a symbolic presence, right? They were invited to sit on the stage. Rosa Parks was presented, but not given a chance to actually speak. It was just this odd moment where even, as so many people are watching, the March on Washington, we talk about it, so memorable, it's such a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement, but it's also a moment that reflects some of the tensions and the ways that some of, the key figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and others, dominated the space and the stage and did not think too much about the role of women in the movement in that context. There's a point in the book where I talk about Hamer called out Martin Luther King Jr. and several others. She criticized them as tools of the Johnson administration because she felt like they were too focused on trying to please LBJ. They were too focused on trying to make nice with the National Democratic Party, and not really focused on making sure that Black people got exactly what they needed to get, right? And this is her perspective. One could quibble with it. One could certainly challenge the perspective, but it was hers, and I think it reflected the views of many people in the space. It also, I think, showed some of the not ideological tensions, but one might say some of the class divides too. I think that comes to the surface when we look at what takes place in '64 at the DNC, but also just some of the conversations that are taking place in the movement. There's absolutely moments where you will see in the book, elitism, classism, all of that comes to the fore.
There's a wonderful question about your work and how it affects the everyday lives of Black women, or perhaps it need not. And I think that this is a wonderful opportunity if you're comfortable to share. Inevitably, you've heard from people who have been affected by your work, and I think if you want to share a story or some material example of it, the answer I'm sure is yes.
Absolutely. So I was chuckling earlier because you had mentioned that I had 3 books, and I was laughing because I think because I have 6 total, right? I know. I was like, don't correct.
No, you should.
But no, 6 total. Several 4, edited
Right.
collections, and then 2 solo authored books. And the first project that I worked on is the Charleston syllabus, readings on race, racism, and racial violence. And I think often of that project, which is just so dear to my heart. I collaborated with Kedida Williams and Chad Williams, 2 remarkable historians. And when we put together the Charleston syllabus, first, what began as a Twitter, hashtag essentially, and then worked on the collection, pulling all of these essays and, just an array of primary and secondary sources that would illuminate the history of racism, racial violence in the US, and also include global perspectives too. I was so taken aback by the response. And this is true, I think, with every project that I've done since, but I'll start there because that was the first time, I think all of this came together for me, when I was reflecting on what it is I want to do and contribute as a historian, as a writer. I still have these letters. I've kept them. Every time people write to me and say, this is how the work has transformed me, I keep that because I go back to those letters in moments where I feel discouraged for whatever reason, or I don't want to, try to finish a piece. I go back to the person, who said, it was not until the Charleston syllabus that I even learned about Ida B. Wells. I mean, really, how in the world is that possible? It is. In fact, as we're talking about Hamer, I wrote my first article on Hamer in 2016. And, I had been invited to contribute this piece on the anniversary of her birthday. I wrote the short piece, didn't think too much about it. I mean, of course, I always try to do my best work. I submitted the piece. The piece circulated well. And I'm thrilled that, the editor was like, oh, wow, the piece is doing well, sending all the stats about how many people are clicking on it. And that's great. But what meant the most to me was having someone write to me who said, I'm from Mississippi. I've lived here all my life. I am in tears reading your piece because I've never heard of Hamer. And I remember thinking, what? But that's not the only, several people said this to me. They said, I've never heard about her. I have not been taught about Hamer in Mississippi schools. These are older people, right? And just sharing with me how transformative it was to encounter this story through my work. And so there are lots of examples like that of people reaching out and saying, just this project that you've done or this short piece that you've written helped me, just open up my eyes to the history, but also encourage me to take this step in my community. Like it's really remarkable. And quite frankly, that's why I do what I do. I just find that to be the most rewarding.
And you do, for a historian, we don't move fast. You move very fast. You are an event like something in you and it ignites something and you go. And it's true. There are, I'm thinking of books you've solely authored, but you have edited and contributed, and it's so much, it's hard to, but I also want to talk about this word that you used, which is discouraged. I think it's important to acknowledge, again, this is personal, but it's important to acknowledge that with that praise and with that, I got some good advice once from Erica Dunbar, which was not to check my email for a while.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Because, I said that I keep all the letters and the lovely emails and, and then like just this week, I will get very nasty emails, sometimes voicemails, racist, sexist, just horrendous kinds of things coming my way. And I see them. I delete them, but I do see them, and oftentimes have to read them through because it's important to me to keep track of, what people are saying, just in case, there's, I need to save something for some reason, as you can imagine. And so that's hard. That's hard when you try to the best of your ability to, you pour into your work and you're doing so because you want to make a meaningful difference, right? It's just, I think a lot of people forget, like, I don't have to write op-eds, right? I don't have to necessarily do these things. I could quietly go into the library and thrust myself into some project, and I can just write to scholars and and not do anything else. I mean, there are people who quietly do their research and they don't have to worry about those emails that I'm getting and those nasty calls. So it is hard to constantly put yourself out there and know that someone's life will be transformed and someone else will send you lots of hate mail, and you have to balance both of that, and it's tough. So the discouragement is part of it. The other thing too, which I don't often talk about, but my relatives will often say to me, like, you are so hard on yourself. You are your greatest critique, and it's true. I am. I mean, I wrote the book. As soon as I received my author's copy, I sat down and read the book, and I was kind of like, oh, I don't like how I said that. Oh no, you know what, that was not so great. And I sort of go through this process where I'm critiquing my work because I want it to be better. I just want it to be better and be stronger. And so there's a sort of it's tough, right? Because on the one hand, people are like, wow, you're so successful, you're doing all these things. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, geez, I'm not producing enough, and I have all these incomplete projects, and I'm, and you said I'm fast. You will tell that to my editor, at MSNBC, who's like still waiting for the, I'm like, I'm so slow. I can't push these things out fast enough. So it's just, it's one of those experiences where you have to just balance it, and you have to, I think, try as much as possible to surround yourself with people who keep you grounded and remind you of, like, when I call friends sometimes and I start going on, I'm like, oh, I'm such a failure. Like, and then they would say, listen, how many books have you published this year? Like, are you for real? Like, stop, and you need people in your life to stop at those moments. Cause I think many of us who do this kind of work struggle, some people call it imposter syndrome, maybe it's something else, but in the end, we try to push past, as I said earlier, the fear, but it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And there are surprisingly, it's mostly easy. And then when it's not, it's really not. And it's really hard. But I always, when I think of your work, I think of like the Hamilton line, like, why do you act like you're running out of time? But you have to, because this is all happening, and you also have the attention, and you have to seize upon it. Someone in the chat mentioned Polly Murray. There was a great book about her called Jane Crow that came out a while ago by Rosalind Rosenberg, and I had looked up to make sure. She's incredible. There's also a great review of it by Catherine Schultz in the New Yorker, which will give you a pretty great preview of it. I'm gonna take this last question as my own. I would love you to tell us, the book just came out, like literally just came out, but you've done a ton of interviews, you've gone, and what happens is you realize the parts of the book that people are going, as the author, you realize the parts of the book that people are going to focus on. And that's great. And you go with it. But inevitably there's some part of you that's like a little heartbroken about some other part. And so I would love you to tell us, direct our attention to some parts of the book, which everyone is going to read, that we should not miss, that what should we be looking out for, and what would you like us to know?
Well, I think it wouldn't surprise many people to know that my favorite chapter in the book is chapter 5, in which I talk about Hamer's internationalism, essentially, right? I mean, it just ties into a lot of the work that I do. And I'm really thrilled that people are focusing on all these other chapters. I know lots of people have sent me feedback on chapter 2 already, and people love different aspects of chapter 4. But I definitely want people to sit with chapter 5, because part of what I think is important is is for people to situate Hamer as a key figure in the larger narrative of Black internationalism, which is a way that we don't often think of Hamer. Of course, she's important as we're talking about the civil rights struggle, but as she emphasized too, that she was fighting not solely for civil rights, but for human rights. And I think it's important to see her through that lens. So I hope people will pay attention to that chapter.
Oh, that's great. And then I have to, okay, I lied. There was one more question. What are you working on now? I mean, besides, 100 things, but what can we look forward to next after everyone's inhaled this?
Yeah. And so I'm writing a book on Black women and the struggle for human rights. So, which is, I think makes sense in light of, what I just said. So this is tentatively called A Global Struggle, Black Women in the Fight for Human Rights. And that's coming out with W.W. Norton. I am writing now, of course, as you can imagine, I'm so busy. So not getting to write as much in the next few weeks as I want to. But the goal is to finish that book within the next 2 years, and fingers crossed that very soon I'll be able to share a publication date. And this is a sweeping history of human rights told through the eyes and the experiences of Black women in the United States from 1865 to the present.
Okay, well, I look forward to it. Thank you so much for all the work that you give us, and in particular for introducing so much more of this story, and also reframing it in a way that really makes you think and connecting it to the present. It's supplied me with so much knowledge and also so many tools as far as activism and supporting those who we want to. If we can't do the work ourselves, there are other options. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who came tonight.
Thank you.
To the Brooklyn Public Library, the Brooklyn Center for History, and have a good night.